Dear participants and colleagues, my name is Queen Biseng. I am the Africa Regional Coordinator for the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Decent. Welcome, and thank you for joining this featured event to Commitment 7 on fostering equality through social protection flows and catalyzing support for development for Africa and least developed countries. Our future event advances the principle of the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration and its 10 commitments, specifically Commitment 7, by addressing one of the most persistent yet under-recognized forms of inequality, caste-like, inherited, status-based on discrimination against communities in Africa and other less developed countries. By centering the recognition, protection, and empowerment, the event directly reflects the Copenhagen goal of eradicating poverty, promoting full and productive employment, advancing gender equality, and fostering inclusive and justice society. In addition, the event will also focus on social protection and inclusion for all. The people-centered development principle underlines the present and future challenges of ensuring that no one throughout the life course be left behind, notwithstanding and despite our increasingly complex, fragmented, but at the same time, interconnected world. Those left behind and not reached by national policies that are supposed to be the universal inclusive, social protection flows, health, and housing, including slum dwellers, especially girls, widows, older people, communities discriminated by work and descent, persons with disabilities, refugees, migrants, and informal sector workers. This future event has brought together representatives of people and communities too often marginalized, silenced, and discriminated against by global, national, and local policy makers. Like the girls from the slums, older people, communities discriminated on work and decent, people with disability, they will share examples of their work on inclusion, demonstrating and highlighting impactful programs which take forward the promise and the spirit of the Copenhagen Declaration, essential to lead us to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. I will now want to call our amazing panelists and speakers on the stage so that we can start. I would love to welcome Ambassador Dr. Agnes Marie Shimbiri Molanda, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Malawi to the United Nations. Please, Excellency. Mrs. Shashra Razavi, Director of the Universal Social Protection Department at the International Labour Organization, ILO. Quickly, Jane Anyayango from Polycom, Zia from Awaz, Priyanka Sami, and Ali Kamara. Before us setting the stage to listen to amazing panelists, we are going to have some keynote addresses and some open remarks. Unfortunately, for those who received the flyer, we are not going to have His Excellency Lok Tapa, the President of ECOSOC and Permanent Representative of Nepal to the United Nations today, as he is committed to another engagement. But it's my privilege to have here and receive Excellency Dr. Agnes, Permanent Representative of Malawi to the United Nations, to give her keynote address. Thank you.
Good morning. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, it is a great honor that I join you at this important event, which recenters one of the most enduring aspirations of our shared human journey, the vision articulated in the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development. That declaration placed people in all their diversity and dignity at the heart of development. It reminded the world that true progress is measured not by the growth of markets, but by the well-being, participation, and the security of every human being. Today, as we revisit Commitment 7 of the Copenhagen Declaration, that is to eradicate poverty in the world through decisive national actions and international cooperation, we are reminded that poverty is not only about a lack of income, it is also about structural exclusion, social invisibility, and denied opportunity. Regarding recognizing the invisibility of descent-based inequalities, excellencies and dear friends, it is worth noting that across Africa and in other least developed countries, there remain groups who live on the furthest margins of recognition. This is not because of choice or geographic position, but it is because of inherited and caste-like hierarchies that have defined their place in society for generations. These communities are discriminated against based on work and descent. These include the Haratine in Mauritania, the Komo and Jongo in West and Central Africa, the Quilombola and Palenque, the Palenque communities in Latin America, and their counterparts in Asia, such as the Dalit, the Burakumin, and the Roma in Europe. These communities continue to face deep-seated and status-based discrimination that perpetuates intergenerational poverty. Their lifestyle stories remind us that inequality is not accidental. It is built into the foundations of social systems. Inequality is grounded in who owns land, who gets education, who is represented in decision-making spaces, and who is not. Recognizing and dismantling these invisible hierarchies is therefore not only a question of justice, but a precondition for sustainable development. Excellencies, social protection is an imperative. It is one of the most powerful equalizers of our time. It provides floor beneath which no one should fall. Yet, despite global commitments, half of the world's population has no access to social protection. In the least developed countries, this figure is almost 80%. When we speak of universal social protection, we must ask, universal for who? We query this because many who are supposed to be covered, informal workers, widows, older people, slum dwellers, persons with disabilities, refugees, migrants, and decent communities remain outside the reach of national schemes that were designed for other categories of people and not for others. For those excluded, the promise of universality remains theoretical. What they experience daily is systemic neglect. They are excluded from health insurance, they are denied pensions, they work in unsafe conditions, and they lack of recognition of traditional occupations and identities. Our task, therefore, is not simply to expand coverage, but to redesign systems so that they consciously include those who were never meant to benefit in their first place. The African Union's Agenda 2063, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Justice Transitions all call for inclusive growth. But the pace of progress is uneven. Malawi and other least developed countries have shown that community-based social protection that is rooted in local knowledge, gender equity, and participation can transform lives. Yet without adequate financing and international solidarity, our efforts remain fragile. We must reaffirm the principle that social protection is not charity. It is a human right, enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and reaffirmed by the Copenhagen Declaration. It is both a moral duty and an economic investment in resilience, productivity, and social cohesion. Excellencies, dear friends, we must also recall that the Copenhagen Declaration placed gender equality and the empowerment of women at the center of social development. Across our societies, women, particularly those from marginalized descent groups, carry the heaviest burdens of unpaid care, insecure work, and violence. Social protection that does not address the gendered dimensions of exclusion is incomplete. Cash transfers, child care support, maternity protection, and pension reforms must all be designed with women's realities in mind. Empowering women from decent communities is, in essence, empowering the entire community. We should remember that you educate a woman, you educate the whole community. This applies to all types of women. In terms of governance, we cannot talk of social inclusion or social integration without addressing issues of governance and accountability. Transparent systems, particularly decision-making, and the protection of civic space are essential to make social protection credible. We must ensure that civil society voices, including those of communities that are discriminated against by work and descent, are not only heard, but needed, or rather heeded. Their lived experience is evidence. Their innovations are solutions. The Global Forum of Communities Discriminated Against by Work and Descent and organizations such as the Inclusivity Project, Asia Dalit Rights Forum, and GCAP have provided platforms for these communities to speak for themselves, not as victims, but as agents of transformation. The voices that nothing about us without us must become the ethics of social development policy. Now, looking ahead, colleagues and friends, how do we renew the spirit of Copenhagen from here? 30 years after Copenhagen, the world faces new challenges that include climate shocks, conflicts, pandemics, displacements, and digital divides. Amidst these challenges, the central question remains: how do we place people at the center of development? The right answer should be by renewing social contract. The world needs to be driven through a social contract or rather by a social contract that integrates social protection, decent work, environmental justice, and human dignity into a single framework of shared responsibility. For countries in special situations like Africa and the least developed countries, the renewed social contract would mean having stronger South-South cooperation, stronger triangular cooperation, and stronger public-private partnerships. Debt relief for social spending, and fair global financing mechanisms that enable these countries to invest in their people. Let us remind ourselves that the measure of our development is not the height of GDP, the gross domestic product, but the depth of our inclusion. In conclusion, Excellencies, dear friends, the vision of the Copenhagen Declaration is still within our reach. But what we need is the courage to look where inequalities hide, to listen where silence prevails, and to act where neglect has become normal. Let us work together, governments, civil society, the United Nations system, and communities themselves, to build societies where every person, regardless of descent, gender, or status, can live with dignity, security, and hope. Remember, equity through social protection is not a slogan. It is the foundation of peace, justice, and sustainable development. I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Universal for who? She asked the question. We must reaffirm that the principle of social protection is not charity, but a human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration and the Copenhagen. There is the need for accountability. There is a need for social contract. Without solidarity, our efforts are fragile. Let's build together. Let's work together to build a just society. Thank you, Excellency. We are now going to have the open remarks from Shasha Razave, Director of the Universal Social Protection Department of ILO. Prior to joining ILO, she was Chief of Research and Data Section at the UN Women, where she directed the research for the entity's Measures flagship report. She oversaw the Gender Statistics Program and provided technical support to the intergovernmental negotiations. She was Senior Researcher at the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, where she coordinated cross-country comparative research programs at the interface of social policy, social protection, labor markets, and care economy. Please, your remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. I don't think we could have asked for a better opening statement than what we heard from Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Malawi. I think that sets us on a very good foundation here in the session today. So it is indeed a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm speaking at your event because it does bring to the summit one of its core priorities, which is about people and their inclusion, about their dignity, about their rights, and about their freedoms. These days, we hear a lot and almost ad nauseum about multiple crises, of climate catastrophes, of new technologies that are going to destroy jobs, demographic shifts that are going to be difficult to manage, and violent conflicts. And all of these crises, of course, bring about a real upheaval with detrimental social, economic, and political consequences that are not evenly shared. To paraphrase the UN Secretary General, I'm quoting here from his lecture, while some navigate these turbulent waters in super yachts, others are left clinging to drifting debris. We hear far less about these consequences and about who is being excluded and who is having their rights and dignities ignored. Likewise, it's only in certain circles that we talk about and we hear very loud and clear about the crisis of values. Democratic backsliding in many countries, the rise of authoritarianism, even in some institutionalized democracies, the backlash against women's rights, against the rights of minorities, migrants, refugees, about divided societies, rampant inequalities, and the crisis also about what is true and what are facts, and a world that seems to have lost its normative compass. Now, while these two types of crises, one, the crisis of values, and the other, the structural changes that we're going through, are happening in tandem, I think for me the crisis of values weighs almost heavier because it undermines our ability to navigate these very major structural transformations or crises that we're facing in a way that is, we are in solidarity and with purpose. But this social summit, and I believe also the declaration that was adopted on Monday by all member states, does really put the social and the people and their rights and dignity at the center of attention. It puts the spotlight precisely on the deep wounds of the many who are struggling at the margins. And here, fulfilling the promise of universality of human rights requires attention to the diversity of life circumstances, to multiple and intersecting discriminations and inequalities. And so the first thing I wanted to say is to congratulate you exactly on the organization of this important event and of speaking truth to power and putting the harsh realities that we're facing at the center of our discussion. So my second point is, where do we go from here now? What do we do? The good news is that there are solutions, and we know some things do work. For example, as you rightly identified with the title of your event, social protection floors that guarantee income security and access to healthcare without financial hardship for all members of society work. We have a wealth of research and evidence that shows that these are not handouts, they're not a waste of money, they're an investment with social, economic, and political positive multiplier effects that can be measured, can be shown, can be documented. They prevent and reduce poverty in a very effective way. They facilitate social inclusion. They enable people to access employment and to have greater social inclusion. Yet, as we already heard, about half of the world's population, according to ILO data, does not even have a wooden board to cling onto, let alone a solid social protection floor. And I want to emphasize, a solid social protection floor is not a safety net. It is a foundation on which people can stand with assurance and with a guarantee of their rights. In Africa and least developed countries, the coverage does not match this almost 50% that we have at the global level. It's a mere fraction of the global average. And coverage rates are lowest where the population is most at risk. In the last World Social Protection Report, which was launched in September 2024, we focused in particular on the climate crisis and why we need to build social protection systems, particularly in countries that are at the forefront of the climate crisis. And yet, when you look at the 20 most vulnerable countries to climate change, many of them are small island developing states, many of them are low-income countries. The coverage rate does not even reach 10% of the population. And this is for SDG 1.3, and the coverage rate refers to having access to one form of social protection. It's not about having that life cycle risks guaranteed with social protection. So it's a really minimum floor. So in the 20 most vulnerable countries to climate change, we have only about 8.7% of the population covered. But the next point I want to turn to is that there is no magical bullet, but we do know that there are certain things that can really help in getting us closer to having a solid social protection floor that provides that coverage that everyone needs as a human right. And there are three important steps that we need to take. First, we need to mobilize strong coalitions, advocacy efforts, and public awareness to create sufficient political will to get the financing that we so desperately need. I want to emphasize that having that financing is not dictated by the level of GDP. When we look at the data, countries at similar levels of income are spending different proportions of GDP on social protection. So GDP is not destiny. Political will matters. And having a very strong coalitions that are advocating for having investments in social protection makes a difference. I think that's an important point to keep in mind. And in tandem, it's very important that we have effective policies that can formalize enterprises and jobs that are currently in the informal economy. This is a key strategy since it's only by increasing this formalization effort that we can mobilize resources through social insurance systems. So you have contributions from employers and from workers. Social security contributions are a very important component of the financing that we need for universal social protection systems. And also by increasing formalization, we can have the tax base with which then governments are able to mobilize the tax financing that is also desperately needed for tax finance social protection, so-called non-contributory social protection. And every social protection system has both components. So very important to have this mixed financing. And in tandem, let's not forget, there's a lot that countries can do, and domestic resource mobilization is important, but we need an enabling global financial architecture. And that's why the discussions at the FFD4 conference, which ended in Sevilla with the Compromiso de Sevilla that member states adopted, was so important. Because it did say, yes, domestic resource mobilization is important, but we live in a very globalized economy. When debt is causing debt distress and robbing countries of the resources they need to invest in social protection, in public services, this is not an enabling financial architecture. We need better ways for developing countries to be able to tax the multinational corporations that have activities in their countries. We need to stop illicit financial flows that deprive countries of resources to invest in social protection systems. And there is a very important work that is ongoing now for having a UN framework convention on international tax cooperation. This is an effort that was initiated and led by many countries from the global south, and I think it's now gaining a lot of momentum, and this is a space we need to watch. So, and the third factor, and this is my last point, technical feasibility is also an absolute necessity. So you need the political pressure to get the financing, you need formalization, but you also need to build your social protection systems based on technical feasibility and good assessment of how to build schemes that are inclusive, sustainable, and provide adequate benefits. So we need to design benefits and delivery systems from the perspective of the most vulnerable, which does not mean targeting only the poor. But making sure that systems that we're building are accessible to those who really face multiple exclusions. There are administrative barriers, physical barriers, language barriers, cost considerations, connectivity issues, and so forth. So we need to build systems that keep in mind those who are most likely to be excluded and make sure that the system works for them. And it's important to say that some countries have developed these systems that are responsive, accessible, and human-centered. I don't have time to go to the details, but we can look to many countries, and I want to say Brazil is one of those countries that's doing very well in this regard. With regard to benefit design, I think it's important to look at international social security standards, ILO conventions and recommendations, because these don't give you a straitjacket. They're not prescriptive. They provide the broad principles on which social protection systems need to be built. They lay down these core principles and they also rule out certain approaches that are contrary to human rights. Benefit needs to be adequate. Schemes need to have what is called indexation, so the amount of benefit keeps up with the rising cost of living, or the average wage, or a combination of the two, so that when we have a cost of living crisis, our benefits don't melt like snowballs on a sunny day. We need to have those indexation mechanisms. We also need to be very cognizant of this idea of solidarity in financing, which means we have to take into account people's contributory capacities based on sound and transparent financial management and administration. In the case of pensions, for example, private pensions don't meet the criteria of international social security standards. A combination of contributory and tax finance benefits that create large risk pools and provide care credits for those who are spending time on unpaid care activities and have redistributive elements like minimum pension guarantees for those with low incomes who cannot meet the criteria set out in some of the contributory schemes are really key. And that's why it's so important for countries to ratify these conventions, like Convention 102, so that they have these very important guidelines and principles on which to build their social security systems. And in order to bring about change and achieve progress on the political, financial, and technical dimensions, we need exactly what you're doing. We need to organize and mobilize to have clear objectives, targets, and milestones for these 3 dimensions that I mentioned. The minimum 2 percentage point coverage increase per year that was pushed and included in the Compromiso de Sevilla, so that every year countries are making an effort to extend coverage by at least 2 percentage points, is a very concrete target that is now in the Compromiso de Sevilla, and it's now also in the Doha Declaration. I know that many of you have been disappointed and were criticizing this minimum 2 percentage extension of social protection coverage because you felt that it lacks ambition. But we think it's important to have this minimum, and we really urge you to work with your governments to mobilize around it, and of course surpass the 2 percentage point if it's possible, and make universality a reality. I very much regret that I will not be able to be here for the full session because I have to go to another session at 10 p.m. But I want to say ILO is the organization that values the power of participation and dialogue, and we are at your disposal to continue this conversation. Reach out to the worker and employer constituents who sit in ILO's governing body and who work with us hand in hand with governments, and you can be part of that conversation, and we look forward to further engagements. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I won't summarize, but go directly to our panelists. As very sorry to say, I cut your minutes now to 2. And I'll be very short introducing you. The first speaker is Jane Anyayango, a fearless grassroots leader and powerful speaker from Kibera, Nairobi. Mrs. Jane, in your experience, what mechanisms are most effective in ensuring that social protection programs are both gender responsive and context-specific to urban informal settlement? And how can government and donors agencies help amplify grassroots voices to strengthen the design and delivery of these programs? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, Anyango, yes, from Kenya. Before I respond to you, just, the previous speaker, Dr. Agnes, just got me thinking when she talked about guaranteed pensions. And I'm looking at myself as someone within the CSO space or the people within the informal employment. Do we really have pensions? Do we even think about it? Do our donors think about this when they're giving us money? So back to social protection. As a grassroots woman, in fact, we are past lamentations we are talking about actions. So when we are talking about social protection, it must begin with listening. Listening to the people on the ground. Listening to the people we have called beneficiaries for a very, very long time, but they are the primary stakeholders. We cannot give cash transfers to widows without considering how they are going to spend the money, without thinking about their grandchildren who are going to kill them the same day because they want the money. We cannot give sanitary towels blindly to the adolescent girls whom we assume are supposed to be missing their schools during their menses, when menstruation is not even a conversation within their families, or they don't even have panties to have these pads on. You cannot wear a pad without a panty. So what I'm saying is that we should always co-create with the people. The world is now advanced. We cannot just assume that because Kenya is talking about this, then all Kenyans are benefiting from what they are talking about. In Kenya, we have the devolved system of government. We can track the ART defaulters. We know we have the numbers of people who are living with HIV/AIDS, but we don't know the number of adolescent girls who cannot access even something as simple as toilets. We do not have the number of older persons who are living in fear, who can be killed anytime because they have no protection. We don't have the numbers. So what are the priorities of our countries? If we have this beautiful devolved system of government, why don't we know each and every person and what they are going through? Why do we come to such platforms and celebrate Kenya as a country when we know we have masses at the grassroots whom we do not reach and we don't know what is happening with them? Let us go into communities. Let us support community-led initiatives. Let us ensure that when we are coming up with initiatives, then they are very tailored towards the needs of the people. Let us not go into communities, into pastoral communities, and give them toilets when we know they are going to move away in search of pastures. So if we are talking about social protection, let us co-create with the people. Let us learn what is on the ground. Let us look at what they are already doing about it. Communities organize themselves around their needs. In my community, we have something called merry-go-round, where people put money together to pay for school fees for their children. People put money together to cater for funerals. People put money together because they know they cannot collect that money. They cannot earn that money at the end of the month. So they have their own order of social protection. If only the government would leverage on this, would complement what is already happening in communities so that it's more sustainable, so that the community are accountable to themselves and they don't really have to depend on leaders who at times are very corrupt, end up not serving the people, end up benefiting themselves from what is supposed to benefit the people. So even the policies, if we have policies and the policies are not with the people, there is no awareness, people don't know how to hold their governments or their leaders accountable, then the policies are not useful to them. Policies must be translated into actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for keeping to the time. Thank you. I hope others will do the same. Our next speaker is Zia Heyman. Amongst other cascades, he is currently leading the Asia Development Alliance as its first Secretary General and Director. Mr. Chair, Zia, as the Chair of Pakistan Development Alliance and Secretary General of Asia Development Alliance, how do you see the social protection flaws in your country and across Asia? What are some solutions concerning financing and accountability of such programs? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a wonderful conversation. I start with my own country, as charity begins with home. Much before the Copenhagen Declaration in 1995, in 1973, almost 22 years before the Copenhagen Declaration, in Pakistan, social inclusion, social justice, and opportunities for all were considered as the Constitution protection under Clause 37, Subclause 5. So that these like social protection floors were included in the Constitution, and that's why we had that Social Security and then this employees' old age benefit programs, and then the pensions and the gratuities. But what happened? Systematically, the laws were degraded, and those opportunities were taken back by the government because of the democratic backsliding, because of the corporate capture, because they wanted to get to deliver that benefit to the private sector. Because the private sector has to contribute into the social security programs, the private sector has to contribute into the employees' old age benefit. So today, we have almost 20 million plus labor force in the formal sector. Only 1.3 million are registered with employees' old age benefit, whereas only 500,000 are getting employees' old age benefits. So the social security is not reaching out to them. And that's why they brought this, what you call social protection schemes. In 2008, they started with like almost 2 million women, and now it's 9.3 million women in Pakistan getting that social protection, 13,500 rupees. In India, almost many of the women are getting this 10,000 on quarterly basis. But how these social protections are being actually utilized as a political weapon, because this is very, very important, and that is actually, further eroding the democracies, because the weak democracies are actually using the public sector money not on the health, not on the education, not on the other social benefits, but on the social protection schemes, just to have more political benefits. And in many parts of the world, what we have, particularly in Asia, the challenge is of data. We really don't have accessibility to the data. The transparency is lacking. These challenges, I think, need to be addressed through whatever the possible means, because the social protection programs are not being accountable through the parliaments, unfortunately. And where it is happening through the parliaments, any accountability is being done, the parliamentarians are like under the influence of the private sector, under the influence of the corporate sector, and they are not actually taking note of those challenges which are happening at the grassroots level. So these are actually the challenges. I was, while myself, Pradeep, and Becky was walking through the streets in Doha this morning, coming towards the session, one of the Sudanese person, he just, without saying hi, he said, "What is the solution?" And I was like, hey. I just asked him who, and he said that I actually heard about you. He recognized me, and I was so happy that now our voices are resonating somehow in the streets of Doha. And he asked me, what is the solution? And I responded, the solution lies in democracy. The solution lies in people's power. The solution lies when we will decide for ourselves. And we know that in the states, in the countries where we have functional democracies, we have better social protections, we have better social inclusions, and we have better opportunities for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isia. Our next speaker is Priyanka Same. She is the Global Gender and Intersectional Lead with International Budget Partnership. Priyanka, you represent the Dalit community of communities discriminated on work and decent in India. Social protection is a huge issue as many don't have any social protection. How do we ensure that people from marginalized communities have access to social security? Thank you.
Thank you, Queen, and Jai Bhim to everyone. Just for colleagues who are not very familiar with the caste system, it is the most dehumanizing social structure, which is 2,000 years old, and Dalits are at the bottommost of that social hierarchy. So when we talk about social protection, what we are actually talking about is power. I say power because it actually comes down to whose lives matter, right? Whose lives count, whose labor is absolutely invisibilized in public policies. That's why social protection is about power. And across the global south, specifically in LDCs and of course in South Asia, systems of exclusion are absolutely embedded in the very foundations of our economic and fiscal models. And just coming back to the caste system, although it is a social structure, and we know it as a social structure, it sort of manifests in all walks of life, including the markets and political economy. And as a Dalit woman from India, and as someone working with the International Budget Partnership on equity in public finance, I see very clearly how public finance systems reinforce discrimination rather than redress it. In India, 91% of the population, of the workforce, remains informal according to government's data, and this is data from 2023. Within that, Dalits are overrepresented. More than 80% of the workforce continues to work in absolutely precarious and informal employment, such as sanitation work, manual scavenging, construction work, domestic work, they're waste pickers. And all of this is connected to the caste system because the caste system situates the Dalits at the bottom of the caste hierarchy and delegates all of these occupations exclusively to Dalits. And, you know, everywhere, wherever social protection schemes exist in India, exclusion persists by design. And for example, in India, we have schemes like there's a government flagship scheme called the eShram, and that's a database meant to register informal workers. And that has recorded over 280 million workers by 2023. But studies specifically show that Dalits still sort of don't feature in the eShram database because of lack of documentation, digital literacy, and caste-based discrimination at enrollment points. And similar patterns, of course, are evident across Africa and other parts of Asia, right? And I would like to note that in the global south, however, in countries in Latin America, like countries like Argentina and Brazil, they have more sustained investments in social protection. But however, if you look at the trend, the invisibility gap is a political choice across the global south. Yeah, when national budgets allocate less than 2% of GDP to social protection, as is the case in most LDCs, the result is structural and intergenerational exclusion. In our country, in India, we invest about 1.4% of GDP, which is absolutely unacceptable. So how do we ensure that communities discriminated on work and descent and historically excluded communities really get meaningful access to social protection? The most important point, and my colleagues before me have sort of mentioned this, but I would like to reiterate that we must make fiscal policy redistributive, because that's the only way to redistributive justice. There is enough wealth. It is simply not mobilized and directed to historically excluded communities. The UNCTAD Trade and Development Report 2023 estimates that developing countries lose about $500 billion annually through tax abuse and profit shifting to multinational corporations. Redirecting even a fraction of this could fund universal social protection to historically excluded communities. Also, we need universal social protection flows as outlined in ILO Recommendation 202. And the other most important thing is inclusion must be built through participatory budgeting and community-led monitoring. In Pune, India, waste picker cooperative led by Dalit women have successfully negotiated with the city to access health insurance and pensions for over 3,000 members. In the state of Karnataka that I belong to, domestic workers for the last 20 years have been rallying and really advocating with the government for a legislation on domestic workers to align with ILO's Domestic Workers Protection Bill. So we must also recognize care work as a central pillar of social protection. Across South Asia, women perform 3 to 5 times more unpaid care work than men, saving billions of dollars in unpaid labor every year. Without investing in childcare, elderly care, community health services, social protection will never be universal. So we really need to look at care infrastructure as fundamental to economies, equitable economies. Finally, accountability must be built into systems. Government should publish disaggregated data, because if you're not counting historically excluded people, they do not exist. Right? So disaggregated data on caste, on disability, on gender, on race must be published to track who benefits from social security budgets. Transparency in allocation and expenditures absolutely essential to transform intent into impact. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Our last speaker, but not the least, is Ali Kamara. He is a right expert with GFOD and an active member of a prominent local social justice group from Gambana. Ali Kamara, you travel right away from Koina. You're the voice of the community. From Koina, Garawala, your village. I just want to find out from you if you think social protection is a pathway to justice for your community, and what are your actions? What do you want? What do you demand immediately? If you can keep to less than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning to each and every person. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Ali Kamara from the Gambia. I'm a right expert for GFOD. Like, I can make it short because I want to talk much, but I don't have much time. What my moderator asked me, let me just say that. But because in our communities, we have been discriminated not far ago, sir. It was 2019. Just 2019. In my community, there was physical fight between the youths of the nobles and the Komos, the slaves. I'm from the Komo side. They call us Komos. In our language, that means slaves. That's physical fight. It went up to burning of a compound where 7 house was burned. And one of my colleagues was tied to force to accept to be a slave. Maybe most of you we had this thing in social media, but I'm a victim of that case because it happens to in my community. I was there. The man who was tied to force to be a slave, I was with him going to the mosque. What made me to feel ashamed? As a Muslim, we call ourselves Muslim. The incident was in Ramadan. We were going to the mosque for Isha prayer and Salatul Trawiyah. My friend was attacked on the way going to the mosque to ask. There was a hat putting on his head. It was written there, Gambana. Gambana means we are all equal. Because of that Gambana hat, they attacked him to tie him with a rope, to take him one compound near the mosque. That person is an imam. To force him, beat him how they want, just to accept to be called a slave. After that incident, they went to burn a compound. The compound landlord is Muhammad Sane. He is the main man of the Gambana movement in our community. To make it short, the police came and investigated. They took 24 accused to the police. What surprised me, even the man whose compound was burned was detained for 2 months, 10 days. Can you imagine? His compound was burned, and the man who was tied to force to be a slave was detained for 2 months, 10 days again, before the judgment. The first day of the court, the prosecutor told them that, the government prosecutor told them, you people you have no case here. Can you imagine? 2 months, 10 days, you keep a person. After that, he said, you don't have a case here. It's happening in Gambia, and we are Muslim, we call ourselves Muslim. In Ramadan, this happened in Ramadan. So let me stop that case there. I'm urging all what we want the world to do is that action point we call for acknowledgement of work and decent-based discrimination recognized, such as human rights violation and major contributor to poverty and exclusion. Second, integrated of local legal and social protection mechanisms strengthen the connection between social protection policies, legal framework, and access to justice to ensure holistic protection and equality for all.
Thank you, Ali.
I thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We got the 2 calls. And I am very sorry that I'm not going to give the 1 minute as is usually the case, because I will call on Amal for the wrap-up. And please, I am also very sorry that the floor will not be open, because those to start the next session are already standing. Amal for the wrap-up and Bina for the closing. Sorry, please.
At your Andesa. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard powerful stories today.
Thank you. My name is Amal Abu Rafa, and I'm the chief of the program on aging at your Andesa. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard powerful stories today, stories of struggle, but also of possibilities for innovation, of people refusing to wait for change and deciding to build it themselves. That's really the message that I want to leave you with. If we want different results, we have to do business differently. What does that mean? It means seeing people not as a problem to fix, but as partners in progress. It means designing social protection that follows people throughout life, from childhood to old age, not programs that stop and start at arbitrary ages, because life does not fit into boxes, and neither should systems that shape it. And it means confronting ageism in all its forms. Let's be honest. Young people are too often told to wait their turn, and older persons are told their turn has passed. Both messages are wrong, and both hold us back. When generations work together, and when we mix youth voices with lived experience, that's when innovation happens. That's when solutions stick. And here's the big picture, in case you weren't aware. For the first time in human history, 5 generations are living and working side by side. The choices we make today in how we protect, include, and invest will shape not only our children's future, but also the futures of today's older persons who are living longer than ever before. As Madam Ambassador mentioned in her keynote address, under international law, social protection is a human right. But at its heart, it is a promise that we make to each other and to ourselves at every part of our life course. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Bina, less than a minute for the closing.
Thank you, Queen. I'd just like to thank Her Excellency Agnes
and Ambassador, for coming and gracing this panel. Thank you very much. Very powerful words of yours, and the rest of the panel, and for Queen for moderating. I'll just say two things. I have a long call to action, but I'm not going to read it out. But we demand universal social protection for all. In order to address inequalities, growing inequalities in the global landscape, we demand social protection. I have one more demand from the communities discriminated on work and descent, that we demand either a declaration or resolution for 270 million people discriminated on work and descent. And that's a demand that is growing by day. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Bina. Please approach the panelists, the speakers bilaterally for your questions. And I also know Her Excellency can answer to some of your questions if you approach her. Thank you, and thank you for your time.